Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and this week I apologize for what is almost certainly going to be a somewhat rushed episode. Not going to be going probably into as much detail as I would typically be inclined to do for the second diary regarding Knife of Dreams because, well, I'm on a time crunch here. This is the day before I leave for my North Carolina trip. I was actually hoping to be able to have enough read so that I could get through the second diary and next week's diary as well before I ended up leaving. And let's just say that didn't end up happening. I didn't have time for that. And because of a freelance project, I actually didn't even have enough time to read everything to be able to do that in the first place. So I'm behind. I did get through this week's reading, which was chapters 4 through 11. And so that's what we're going to cover today. It was quite a bit of reading. I read for approaching 7.5 hours, actually, which puts me at just over 13 hours read total on the book. So, I did no small number of hours reading. I got through no small chunk of the book this week. It's just that there was a little bit of it that wasn't the best, I guess. So to get into spoiler-free impressions, I'll go ahead and say there were 2 chapters regarding the Perrin storyline within the reading this week, and then all of the rest of it was Matt's storyline. The Perrin and Zareen storyline was actually a little bit packed with little tidbits of information, a good bit of it that I'm going to be glossing over, just straight up not mentioning in this video. My apologies. But starting to get a little bit of momentum, implicit momentum anyway, working towards hopefully a resolution for that plot line that I'm looking forward to. And then Matt's plot line was a little bit slower. It felt a little bit more meandering. There was still plenty of interesting details littered throughout these chapters, and a lot of it was still good. But there was also a good chunk of it that did feel a little bit meandering, that was a little bit harder to push through, and didn't ended up reading most of those chapters as quickly as I ought to have, and certainly didn't read as quickly as, say, the first 5 chapters, which all read much faster than I would have predicted just based off of my average reading speed. So the Matt chapters were a little bit slower, which is unfortunate. I didn't really enjoy that content quite as much. That one's taking a little bit to really do the thing. You know, there's been a couple of relatively major developments in this week's reading, which bodes well for the future here, but not a whole ton actually happened as far as this week's content goes. And even then, just to be clear, there is still plenty of stuff that I'm going to be glossing over. There's still plenty of stuff to talk about, so we will get to all of that in due time. But now that we're going to transfer here into the spoiler territory, let's begin with the Perrin and Zareen plotline here with chapters 4 through 5. Again, a lot of the details in this week's diary are probably going to be glossed over in favor of brevity, both for my sanity and because I'm on a time crunch, so that is what we are going to do. Chapter 4 begins following up basically on that little meeting that Perrin had with Galena from that scene within the prologue, and now sees Perrin deciding to meet with, a bunch of other people with the Shanchan. He has had that organized and is going to be having a meeting about the Shanchan, about what to do with the Shido Aiel to potentially form an alliance. So that's what we're working with. Both sides apparently bring a lot more people to the meeting than was agreed upon because neither one trusts the other. But as a show of power and also reassurance to a degree, Perrin basically says that he has no intent of doing anything against the Shanchan directly, and that Barrelane, who is with him and who has a name that is reminiscent of Arthur Hawkwing, makes no claim on anything except for Mayene, where she rules, and Perrin and his people have agreed not to necessarily seek to reestablish Manetheren or anything like that, anything that would conflict with the Shanchan purposes here. So Perrin does a little bit of reassurance here and also does a little show of power by having, let's see, what does it say that he has done? He has a couple Two Rivers archers, some of his best archers, from a good distance out in the woods, shoot a branch that he holds out in his arm, and they end up hitting the branch, and then he has some of the Ashaman set that branch ablaze, remotely through magic, because the Shanchan have some, Soldam and Damane with them, they know that it wasn't the female half of the power that did it, so they can assume that Sidon was able to be used in that moment. At least that's my understanding of that scene. Pretty good display of power, actually. It's just like, I have good resources. If I wanted to hurt you, you would already be hurt, or something like that. That's kind of the impression that I got anyway. So yeah, that happens, and so Perrin has his army withdraw after he tells the Shanshan army to withdraw, and discusses with a couple of the leaders his plans against the Shido, and his plan is basically to amass a very large amount of fork root into their water supply to essentially knock out all of the wise ones and everyone associated therein, everybody who has actual control and power with the power. And he plans to obtain that fork root through the Shanshan, since they have, ways to get it. Initially, the Shanshan leader is kind of resistant, like, I don't want to do that because that requires going through some of these people that I just don't feel like going through for this. That would be asking questions that I don't want to have to answer, that kind of thing. And Perrin says that, no worries, I have a notice here that says, from High Lady Suroth herself. Perrin doesn't know who Suroth is, but assumes that she's of importance, which he is correct about that. He has a notice from High Lady Suroth that says that anything that the bearer of that note wants done needs to be done, no questions asked. So he plans to use that to be able to get the fork root through the Shanshan, for that to be put into the water supply, and then he also guarantees the Shanshan that he has plenty of channelers to help in their invasion of the town, to help in their plan, their plotting, but gets assurances that none of those channelers are going to be leashed by the Shanshan, so that's a good move on his part. Chapter 5 switches us over to Zareen's POV, and Zareen is attending Savannah in her tent. There's a lot of tension stuff going on between Savannah and Tharava here. A lot of technical stuff that the details just don't really need to be hashed out in this video, so I'm just not going to go over all of it. I don't really care, and I don't think it's actually that important. If it's important, it'll come up later and we'll be reminded, but for the moment it doesn't really matter enough to say it all here. Zareen is finally relieved after this scene. There's a lot of complaining. Basically what it boils down to is that Savannah's pretty unhappy with Tharava for all of the punishments that Galena is receiving from Tharava, because now Savannah doesn't have anywhere for her to punish Galena now, because she's already so beaten to shreds. Galena appears to be pretty much broken, so that's not great, and as a result Zareen is pretty worried, I guess, about whether Galena is going to be able to fulfill her promise, even if the Oath Rod is obtained for her. And she's also thinks about some of her plans breaking apart due to how kind of reckless her sworn followers are about their plans to escape, that it's probably going to get out eventually. She thinks about this in particular when she is relieved by, some of the other slaves, we'll go ahead and call them, because that's effectively what they are. And Zareen thinks about the person who relieves her specifically, about how he will have to die if he discovers about people swearing any form of fealty to her. So yeah, she thinks about all this stuff as she returns to her tent. She's visited at some point first by a couple of her followers who did actually manage to obtain the Oath Rod. So speaking of the Oath Rod, she now has that now, and she takes that and hides it herself. And she's also visited by Roland, who's basically been a guardian angel of sorts for her, and he says that he may be going back to the Waste soon, that he's probably not going to stick around here very long, because one of the things that was being argued about in the tent was whether they're going to stay at this town, or if they're going to go somewhere else. Roland says that he's probably going to go back to the Waste soon, and that if he does, he promises to take Zareen with him and then leave her at the next town. So, we have some of that internal plotting. Perrin's pretty close to being able to enter in and free some of these people, but also some of them might be able to escape soon. So that's all well and interesting. But that is the end of the Zareen Perrin plot here. I know that chapter 12 actually goes into this plot line. This would have ordinarily been where I got to that, but because of my reading the last number of days, I was hoping to actually be through chapter 12 today so that I can include it here. It didn't happen, so that is going to happen next week, assuming that I have time to actually get that diary out on time. We'll see. More on that a little bit later. But that's going to take us into chapters, oh man, if I could count, 6 through 11, which are all Matt POV stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of... It's more meandering, relatively speaking, so we'll just go ahead and get into it. Chapter 6 in particular, it doesn't really have much going on. It's basically just the traveling show having stopped at this town called, like, Jorador, or however it's pronounced. I don't know, and don't really care. Matt goes into the town and buys a staff that he plans to make into a longbow, so I'm sure that'll become important later. And he also buys a fine breed of horse from... wherever it is that's from, I forget. Is it Ered Daman, where the horse is from? It's a breed called a razor. This is a particularly special kind of razor. It's like the only time you'll see one of those types of horses outside of that area. So he's like, pays a lot for it because he plans to gift it to Tuon. And upon re-arriving back to the traveling show, he starts calling Tuon Precious as like a pet name to coincide with, to counter with her pet name, calling Matt Toy all of the time, which she interprets as a kind of game. And that becomes not important per se, but it becomes a funny joke a little bit later, and we'll get to that. Back at the traveling show, there are stories being told amongst some of this group of people of Jane Farstrider, for example, whom Tuon is unfamiliar with. Noel also seems to know a lot about the character. I think Noel is the one telling these stories. He seems to know a lot about things that Matt wouldn't have taken him to have known very much about, so there might be something interesting to find out about that character later. There might be some interesting reveal to come. Not entirely sure, but that is my interpretation. And then Sandar barges in while some of these tales are being told, to say that there are Shan setting up at a nearby camp. And chapter 7 basically sees right at the beginning Matt going to check that out and witnessing a handful of Shan soldiers trying to enter the show without paying. And like one of the commanders of the Shan army, asks what all the fuss is about, because there's like a brief little fist fight that breaks out here, if I was understanding correctly. And Matt is able to speak as a witness, be like, hey, your guards just tried to enter without paying, and she forces the guards to go back to the camp that the Shan had set up. So Matt's like, okay, yeah, this is serious, and he goes to go check up on the Aes Sedai and, Tuon and Seleucia and all of them to make sure that things are all okay there, and to basically warn them that, like, hey, Shan are nearby. And when he gets to the wagon that the Aes Sedai are staying at, basically, he feels cold against his chest from that fox head medallion that he wears that basically... it alerts him to when, at least when women are channeling. I don't know if it tells him when men are channeling. It might, but I don't know, actually. I know it does for women, obviously, and it goes cold when that does happen, and it also interrupts weaves so that channeling can't affect him. He enters the wagon after feeling that there's a lot of channeling going on inside the wagon. He berates the Aes Sedai for what's going on, basically telling them all that they'd be stuck in a dom, necklaces, if not for him, that they would be legitimate slaves to the Shan if not for him, and that he's not going to, be disrespected or anything by them. Made a big show of this moment, that's for sure. And Mistress Anon, we kind of get in the various interactions that occur in this wagon here. Mistress Anon seems to know a little bit too much about Aes Sedai, so again, a little bit of a revelation that we'll probably get later, and we do within this week's reading, but we'll get there when we get there. It turns out that within all the bustling that was going on with the channeling and whatnot, turns out that Bethaman, one of the Shan, turned out to channel quite a bit, that was probably most of what Matt felt, because she channeled what the Aes Sedai assumed to probably have been about as much as she could hold on to, kind of implicitly. Disagreements abound amongst the Aes Sedai about kind of how to handle this, how to handle Bethaman, since she'll need to be either taught to not accidentally kill herself, or if she should be allowed to die through mishandling of the power or whatever, and it is eventually agreed upon that Bethamon will be taught a little bit, at least, how to keep herself safe from the power. And in the midst of all those conversations, Matt slips out of the wagon and tells Jolene's warders to ask her about what happened to her within the wagon, because they ask him about what happened, and that's because Matt ended up spanking Jolene in that scene, which turned out being very cringe. This is the first time there's been like a true spanking scene that kind of bothered me a little bit, and also came very much out of nowhere. So yeah, that happened. Whatever, I don't really care that much. It doesn't affect the story enough. We'll see how bad things get with other books to make me understand why people make such a big deal about spanking within the series. This was the first scene that really took me off guard and also didn't make any sense, so we'll say that. Anyway, that's going to take us into Chapter 8, where the traveling show has decided to leave because of that Shan-Chan camp that was being built nearby, so they've moved on a little bit. After a little while, Matt finally goes and talks to Aludra again, the, Illuminator, and has determined, finally, he is able to figure out in this time what it is that Aludra actually needs a Bellfounder for, and she is like, yeah, you basically figured out, and tells him the rest of what the details are. Apparently, she needs a Bellfounder to produce more robust lofting tubes to launch attacks against the Shan-Chan, because she wants to, take revenge upon the Shan-Chan for her people basically being destroyed, and in order to be able to send charges like a couple of miles, she needs Bellfounders, she needs metalworkers, she needs, more robust equipment to be able to do that. And tells Matt this, and Matt says that he knows of somebody who could probably do this. And when she asks who it is, he says, the Dragon Reborn, Rand al'Thor could help you with this. And she's at first a bit doubtful, but Matt reveals that, hey, I grew up in the same village with Rand, I know him, so come with me and I can eventually get you to him. And so I guess she basically agrees to go with him when he eventually leaves the show. Egianan and Bale also, within the chapter here, go into the next town, whatever the next town was called, I forget already. They get married, and Matt leaves them the wagon that they've all three been staying in up to this point, and he buys a tent that he sets up near Tuon's wagon, which he uses to spend a little bit more time with her over the upcoming days. They talk briefly in various moments about the Dragon Reborn, about the horn blower. Like Tuon says that the blower of the horn of Valir would make a very good resource if captured. So that kind of puts Matt off a little bit. He doesn't reveal that he was actually the one that did it for obvious reasons, but that does bother him a little bit. So they talk about this, and then some other stuff about Shan-Chan prophecies with regard to the last battle. Speaking of prophecies with regard to the last battle, that was something in the Perrin chapter that I didn't mention. Was that one of the Shan-Chan leaders noticed that Perrin had a hammer, and was saying, well, like, thank goodness you didn't come under the name of whatever it was, like Wolf something, because that would indicate that the last battle was soon to approach. And Perrin doesn't say anything about it, doesn't reveal that he is a wolf brother, that he has association with wolves or anything like that. So, there's just all these omens that keep coming up about the last battle being at hand. Eventually, within this chapter, though, Matt does finally gift Tuon the Razor Breed horse, and he goes for a ride with her, and Seleucia comes along because Seleucia follows Tuon everywhere. And when suddenly Tuon darts off and he follows her to an area where he experiences a lot of memories from, the dead people whose memories fill up his head, and actually experiences some memories within the area of people dying. Like, he experiences death from a couple of these memories, which is a really interesting thing. It's somewhat interesting development that I'm sure is probably going to have some ramifications on the future. I'm not entirely sure, but he does recognize the area from what it used to be in the past, so that's interesting. And also, apparently, there were some Tinkers nearby who happened to see the whole thing with Tuon and Seleucia running off and Matt kind of chasing after Tuon. And so when they show up to ask about it, because Matt decides that he's going to ask or confront them directly about it, because in one of his memories from the old dead people in his head, he's like, if the Tinkers think that there's something up here. They're going to follow us until they can ask us about it, so I'm just going to go to them directly and get this over with. So they do end up meeting with the Tinkers very briefly at the end of the chapter. The girls have weird interactions with the women Tinkers, and Matt learns that the Tinkers are heading to Abu Dar. That's basically all that happens there. Chapter 9 sees Matt learning from Egianin that there's he learns a little bit from her about like the royal family, the Shanshan royal family, some of the technicalities associated therein, such as all the infighting that goes on there, the fact that a lot of Tuon's siblings have killed each other off, the fact that the royal family tends to have an obscene amount of children, so that of the ones who survive, there will surely be one who is worthy to take the throne, and so he learns a little bit about that. He also learns apparently that the razor breed horse was a pretty perfect courting gift, which he didn't necessarily realize. Egianin thinks that he did it on purpose, but he didn't necessarily. Like, he didn't mean for it to be the perfect courting gift. It just kind of happened. But yeah, that happens, and then he goes and checks up on the women, the Aes Sedai in particular. And though they all try to bully him to get a hold of the medallion, the fox head medallion that he wears to keep himself safe from them channeling against him, he refuses to even let them see it. But eventually they leave, and he does let Mistress Anon see and even touch the medallion a little bit. He surmises that she was once Aes Sedai. This is that revelation that I was referring to with regard to her character, and she tells him that yes, she was an Aes Sedai, implies, I don't think she says it directly, but she very much heavily implies that she was stilled, and that unlike most women who die eventually after being stilled, she was found by the man who is now her husband, dying in the streets of Abu Dar, who basically saved her. She also guesses at Matt's infatuation with Tuon, and they agree to keep secrets with each other, or keep each other's secrets, rather. And speaking of secrets, apparently Valen Luca has told some of the Aes Sedai as of recent about Tuon being a high lady amongst the Shanshan, so massive oof moment there, and after much hounding with regard to this, the Aes Sedai bother Tuon a lot about this revelation. Eventually they barge in on Seleucia and Tuon, and they manage to put a couple of Adam bracelets on some of them and basically hold the others. With the power, Matt is able to free them from the bracelets. He's like, no, you're not going to be able to hold these women with Adam for eternity. You're not going to do that, Tuon. And so he's able to free them, releasing, freeing them from the necklaces. And Tuon is a little bit surprised when she tries to hold Matt with a weave of air, for example, to stop him from being able to do this, and realizes that Matt has the medallion, that Matt has a way of not being affected by the magic. So he's able to free the Aes Sedai and basically make them all kind of agree to play a little bit more nicer with each other, and then he proceeds to bury the Adam before they move on. That's chapter 9. Chapter 10 sees a very cool but also kind of disturbing scene where the traveling show basically tries to make camp. They start to make camp near an area called an old village area called Shiota. And I don't know, I couldn't fully tell whether or not the village was actually real. There was definitely a peddler that was traveling around near this area that Matt watches sink into the ground, and the village, I guess, sinks into the ground at the same time. I'm not entirely sure how much of this was real, how much of it was just apparitions of dead people from a time long past. I was just kind of confused. I was very tired while reading this scene, so it was just kind of weird and unsettling. There's also a little bit of talk about, Tarmon Gaidan being near at hand, nigh at hand, again, there's that term, because of seeing the dead. So when this was referenced, I'm like, okay, so how much of this was just people seeing the dead and how much of this actually happened in real time? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. But in either case, they do leave again. Valen Luca does have them all leave again. Also unsettling are amongst some of these travels, Tuon basically asking Matt why crows and other things like this, why Corvians are kind of a bad omen, and Matt explains that it's because they are sometimes used as eyes for the Dark One, which the Shan-Chan seem to not take super seriously, say it's as realistic as like a couple random examples of things that don't make any sense realistically, but these things also happen to accidentally be references to experiences that Matt had from the visions that he got from the Aelfin and Eelfin way back when. The same time when he learned that he would marry the daughter of the Nine Moons. So, there's a lot of serendipitous, funny little coincidences going on here. In either case, later in the chapter, while playing a game of snakes and foxes, there's a lot of like interpersonal dramatic stuff going on, and one of these things is that Tom Marilyn keeps reading a letter over and over, a letter that he's been reading a lot of and that Matt finally decides to ask about. And because he's asked about it, now Tom makes him read the letter, supposedly. This is probably the biggest revelation of Matt's section and probably the coolest moment of Matt's POV here from my reading this week. This letter was written by Moiraine before she went and died in Book 5, and the letter says that no matter what happened, that Moiraine is actually still alive somewhere. Apparently, Moiraine also seems to be fond of Tom, which is a little bit weird, but we're just going to gloss over that for now. And apparently, Matt knows where it is that she is being kept, or where it is that she's at, and that he and two other people need to join together to come save her. That Matt can't be told about this letter, can't be told about this truth until he inquires about the letter. And like I said, he inquired about the letter here, hence why Tom made him read it. So now that they know, they gotta go and rescue her. And Matt reluctantly finally agrees at some point to go wherever it is that she needs to be freed. And so you might ask, okay, where is that? Well, we get all that information in the chapter as well, because apparently Olver got told a lot of stories from Birgitte about Jane Farstrider and basically the kind of area, I don't remember where it's called specifically, that Moiraine is supposedly at, but that they can get there by going through the Tower of Genji, which Matt saw apparently when it's described to him what the tower is. He remembers that he saw that when he and Randon Bail Damon back in like book 2 or something were traveling on the river Arenel or whatever it was called. So like Matt does actually know where that's at, and then he's just like, okay, well, this tower, according to legend, is a like complete solid block, like there's no entrance into it no matter where you try to go into it. And Olver reveals that Birgitte had said that a bronze dagger carving a particular symbol, which I guess the symbol comes from the Snakes and Foxes game, will open the tower to wherever it is that Moiraine's at. So that's something that they've got to do. Big revelation. Not all of it made sense. In fact, a lot of it didn't really make sense, but it was pretty cool stuff, so I'll give it that. Chapter 11 is a little bit more meandering. I feel like Chapter 10 would have been a better place to end the POV off with, if not for the joke that I referenced earlier, but the show stops near another place called Medirin, and Tuon wants to visit a hell, and a hell is like a very low quality inn where like all of the ragtag crazy, maybe not crazy, but all the violent people tend to reside at. For some reason, she wants to visit one of these places and insists that Matt had promised that she would be able to see one of these places. And so Matt sarcastically asks Tom if Tom happens to know any places in the town nearby that are like this. And Tom decides that, yes, he happens to know a place. But what he does is he just takes Matt and Seleucia and Tuon to a regular inn. It's a little bit rougher of sorts. And it's also very crowded considering the time of day. So he decides that this is going to be a good enough place to take Tuon to. And Tuon gets to experience a little bit of this in experience here. She wants to see what Matt's luck is like, and so he goes to a nearby table. This inn is full of a bunch of merchanters who are going to be playing later, so they're getting drunk and like playing dice and whatever before it is that they're going to do their merchant stuff. But Matt wagers with games of dice with some people, getting very lucky, winning over and over again, not on big bets, just little bets that, kind of add up over time. He makes a lot of money through this and uses some of that money to pay for a round of everybody's drinks within the inn as a way of warming them up to him, because people are less likely to accuse you of being a cheat or being angry about you potentially cheating if you are paying for stuff for them in the meantime. And also loses the very last toss of dice, which causes him to lose essentially all of the rest of what he won. And while Tuon says that must have been bad luck for that to happen to him, he was like, no, actually, that's the best luck of all, because now nobody's going to suspect that there was anything wrong. They're not going to suspect that I was cheating because I just finished off my little round of luck by losing basically everything. So, there was that interaction that happens. And then Tom reveals after this event, while Tuon and Seleucia go off for a bit, go use a washroom or something, Tuon reveals that there is a Shanshan army somewhere up ahead of the traveling show, and that they are looking for a Daughter of the Nine Moons imposter. So they are implicitly looking for Tuon as an imposter, which I'm supposing that this command was probably put forth by Suroth, having been promised by one of the Forsaken that Suroth would be able to be made the Empress or something. So Suroth probably put a command out to find anybody claiming to be the Daughter of the Nine Moons to any degree and kill that person. So Tom reveals that there is definitely a Shanshan army up ahead that is looking to do just this, and so Matt and Tom plan to leave into the forest now before they end up getting to that point, to basically run off with Tuon and whoever else they need to go, because at this point there are just too many people on the road behind, so they can't quite go back to Abu Dar yet. But yeah, when they leave the inn, they do all leave the inn together. They are attacked, however, by a group of swordsmen. Matt kills all of the male swordsmen, but there's one woman at the very end who nearly kills Matt first before Tuon steps in and actually saves Matt here, killing the last woman. You have a little bit of that payoff with the quote-unquote joke that I mentioned earlier. The game that Tuon sees is calling each other toy and precious as a little bit of a game. Tuon is like, you just lost the game, because apparently in the scuffle dealing with these swordsmen, Matt had referred to Tuon as Tuon instead of Precious before Tuon ever ended up calling Matt Matt. So apparently she won whatever this game is that she sees as a game in her head. I'm supposing that's probably some other Shanshan cultural thing that we don't really know too many details about, but in either case this happens, and Matt also realizes at the very end that one of the dead bodies, when he goes to collect some of his extra knives that he had thrown, one of the bodies was a merchander that had actually been in the inn and left while Matt was gambling, playing dice. So basically they have to leave, because nobody's going to believe that any merchanters were just attacking these people, were just attacking Matt or anybody. So there's some reason why these people ended up attacking Matt and them. Not entirely sure what it is, but they decide, like, we need to leave, not just before we get to the Shanshan army that is going to try to kill Tuon, but we just need to leave now, because that's probably safer. And that is where the chapter ends. And yeah, that's everything. I managed to get through that a lot quicker than I expected to, and I'm looking forward to reading the next handful of chapters. Like I said before, chapter 12, I believe, is going to be another Perrin POV chapter, probably following up on the last couple chapters that I just talked about, or I guess the first couple chapters that I talked about in this video, and I was looking to try to get that chapter included in this video, but it'll have to be included in the next diary. And as we're wrapping things up here now, I guess I should say that the next diary is most likely going to be chapters 12 through 17. It's only like the next 90 pages or so, a little bit of a smaller bunch of reading, and will get me basically right exactly to the halfway point of the book, and that is because this first chapter here, chapter 12, is going to be Perrin POV, and then I think all of the rest of the chapters that I have scheduled for the next diary are all Elaine POV, I think, so that'll be like an easy way to split off a little bit of a shorter section. As I said at the beginning of this diary, this is a video that I'm producing pretty much last minute. This video goes out tomorrow at the time that I'm recording this, and I only have, you know, the rest of today to be able to get this done, plus my last few things that I gotta get ready for my trip to North Carolina. I'm going to be flying out tomorrow morning, or at the time that this video releases, this morning, and I'll be back next Tuesday, like very late at night, basically. So the next diary may or may not be delayed. I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen. I'm going to try to read these next 90 pages over the coming week while I'm gone. There's no guarantee that I'll be able to do that, but I'll certainly try to have it all done by next Wednesday, or at least next Wednesday morning, so that I can still get the next diary about that content out next Thursday on time. But if the next diary does not come out next Thursday, I'll probably release it like next Friday or something, like a day late. It just depends on the timing of when I get home from the trip and how much I actually get read and how much time I have to produce that diary on time. So if there's a little bit of delay on the next video or on the next diary, I apologize sincerely. It's just that timing didn't really work out for me with regard to getting all this done ahead of time. But in either case, that is all that I have for you. I'm enjoying this book a bit. It's not as amazing. It's not wowing me the way that I was hoping it would after the last couple of books, but I'm still enjoying it a good bit, and I'm looking forward to continuing. With that said, thank you guys for watching this diary. If the next diary is out on time, I'll see you guys next Thursday. If it is not out on time, I'll see you whenever it is that comes out. I appreciate you for watching. I hope you check out the next one. But for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and thank goodness I managed to make a short diary for once.